Hello folks, and welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm kind of returning to my love of Warhammer Age of Sigmar because I have been keeping up, regardless of my absence, with all the various Battletomes that have been coming out over the last little while. So I've got the Eideneth Deepkin one here, Gloomspite Gitz here, and I thought I would sort of change things up a little bit with the way that I approach doing my Warhammer Age of Sigmar Battletome reviews, unboxings, unbookings, however they were. And so I thought I'd kind of instead mix it around the idea of things that I really, really like about a particular Battletome and talking them through, essentially. So, yes, I will be flicking through the Battletome as we go through. Again, these are absolutely beautiful. I'm a really big fan of the undead in general, although I don't tend to play them that often. I did flirt with the idea of diving into a Soulblight Gravelords army at some point, as well as also tinkered with the idea of doing vampire counts back when Warhammer Fantasy Battles was still a thing. But I have now got my hands on this. My friend is a big player of the Soulblight Gravelords, so I've not necessarily had much of a reason to dive into them as a force myself at the moment regardless, but I might still do depending on how we go with this discussion. But I thought I would touch on 5 things that I particularly liked about the new Battletomes, and in particular what we've got here for the Soulblight Gravelords. Now, the first thing that I really, really like about the Soulblight Gravelords is whilst they do have a focus on vampires, they have not ditched the idea of the big, unyielding skeletal legions. And the Barrow Kingdoms still retain a lot of that element worked in here as well. Because, as they talk about in the book, Shaiish was never just always this nadir of death, and it did at one point used to have many petty kingdoms that spread across the realm itself. And the Barrow Kingdoms are essentially an army that is mostly formed up of the big lords and ladies, be they whites and all that kind of thing, white kings and lords, who are been resurrected back by Nagash to unendingly serve him in his quest to dominate not just Shaiish, but the rest of the mortal realms. And so it was absolutely awesome to see that there was still lots of lore built into the book itself, alongside all the things we've seen for like New Lamia and the various main armies and such, led by the various vampires. It was great to see that we still had lots of stuff here for the White Kings and the White Lords, and I was particularly drawn to this amazing piece of artwork that you get in the book. Which, yes, it does show you the idea of like the vampiric nature of things, but it also gives you that look of what it was like, what it would be like to be as part of the Barrow Kingdoms. I've always really enjoyed the section of The Lord of the Rings in the first book, The Fellowship, where the hobbits go to the Barrow Downs. And I've always had a fascination with barrows as well, ever since I was young, because there's a particular place in Dorset, where my grandparents used to live, that had barrows on the top of it, and it always reminded me of that kind of thing. So seeing this kind of stuff still represented there was really cool. There's this really nice sense of like shambling legions that you get from the Barrow Kingdoms, and I really like the idea that you have those lordly characters that have still retained a bunch of their character from back in the day, as it were. And you have these really interesting lords and ladies and kings and queens that you could add into your forces to kind of almost get that kind of like Necron vibe things, almost, with that sort of dynasty quality to it. And you could have some fun painting the different heraldry of the various Barrow Kingdoms as you were going through. So it was nice to see that there was plenty of lore still based into it there, which I thought was quite cool. The next thing I want to talk about is actually to take a little bit of a twist away from things. And it was actually to dive into the vampires themselves, but in particular a section of the vampires that I was particularly drawn to. So if you want the blade, I guess, of the Warhammer Age of Sigmar world, then you should turn your attention to the one and only Cado Ezechiar. He has a couple of really awesome novels so far, more hopefully to come, which follow his adventures. So he was a noble whose land was destroyed by a Zentian cult, the Arcanite cult, as you can see there. His land was burnt to the ground, and he was given a sort of ultimatum, effectively, by Neferata, who told him that she would gift him with the skills to pay the bills, the skills to deal with his enemies, if he would accept the curse itself, the blight, and serve her. And so Cado accepted this gift, and he has been traversing the mortal realms trying to hunt down the remnants of this cult as he does so. This hasn't meant that this has meant, sorry, that he's not necessarily in Neferata's good books, because he doesn't necessarily follow the same structure as most of the other vampire lords that exist out there, and he sort of does his own thing. He's then backed up by a couple of his companions. One of them is the I can't remember her name. It's somewhere in here. I'll get to it when I look at her. When I look at the entry in the Battletome. But he's backed up by his allies and things like that, as well as a series of rings that he has on his fingers. And each of those rings has the souls of some of his advisors from when he was a human lord. And they sort of help him in his battles. So he's a really interesting character if you're looking to dive into something of that kind of Blade-esque quality to the vampires, but brought into the mortal realms. Next to that, we have another vampire family, I suppose, or a character that I'm particularly enamoured with. And you can still run them as a force on the tabletop. They've still retained all of the miniatures and all that kind of thing. And that is based around Radakar the Wolf, or / Radakar the Beast, and his city of Ulfenkarn, which has been dominated over the last while as part of the Cursed City game, if you've played that, the Warhammer Quest game, but also has eventually fallen into the Nadir, effectively. But he's a really interesting character. So he was a marauder who rode around, who sailed around on his ship, the Impaler's Gift, after getting the gifts of the Virkos. And so with doing this, he would go around, he would plunder, he would raid, he would do all sorts of different things till he found the city of Ulfenkarn, or Mournhold as back in the day, and he saved it from a chaos and incursion. He destroyed the demon that was besieging the walls, and from there he sort of sat himself up as a noble within the ranks of Mournhold's nobility. This then led to him taking over and controlling the city, and leading it to become the Cursed City that you will know from the actual Warhammer Quest game. He was eventually hunted down once by the heroes of the Cursed City, and then in that transformation turned into Radakar the Beast, and then now roams the lands of Shaish and beyond, looking for a little bit of revenge against those who defeated him. But he's a really interesting character, and it's all tied into the sort of grim, dark nature of the Cursed City as well. And I really like that they've carried that through into the flavour of not just Radakar, but the rest of his, not companions, but those who are part of the Virkos dynasty. So you have Belladama Volga, who is the one who bestowed upon him the curse. You have Lady Annika. You have Ivya Volga, and possibly another one of my favourite characters amongst the set, which is Kritza, the Rat King. He who's one who displeased Radakar and was thrown into the sewers, and his broken body somehow survived after he drank the blood of the rats that were down there in the depths of the Cursed City, and he then became almost a power unto his own right, sneaking around, avoiding the glare of Radakar, and eventually escaping from the city as well to do his own dirty work. And the thing that I quite like about this is that you can really sort of drill home the idea of doing a themed force, and bring together some interesting elements when it comes to the hobby side of things. So obviously you have this different aesthetic to the Virkos brood, which is quite cool. The kind of wolf mentality, sort of Eastern European vibe to everything. Sort of almost Cossacky in a little way. But you could also then play around with that from a modelling point of view as well. Because yes, you can have the undead legions at your command. You can have your Korsagi ogres and all that kind of thing. But there's also the ability to throw in mortals who are kind of like under his thrall. So you could kind of model that around some of the other characters that you included in your army. Maybe some of your skeletal legions that you use, your actual skeleton warriors, your undead soldiers, aren't actually undead, but you could just have them as actual humans that are serving under his thrall, which I thought would be quite nice, as sort of spawn or something to that effect. But But yeah, it's really interesting that's in there as well, and it's good to see that the Cursed City is still very much catered for. Now, flipping forward a little bit in the book, we get to some of the War Scrolls, and in particular, as I was saying, there is one for the Blades of the Hollow King. So here's where I remember the names. So we have Cado, of course, but you also have Sisendra, and you have his, I would say helper, but not really, in Aurelius. So they've really gone to town to kind of upgrade Cado's rules. You can still play him as the individual character. In fact, I told you I'd be back. In fact, here is the older model for Cado that I've painted up to show that I do actually quite like the character. So you can still run this version of Cado if you want to, which is fair enough. But there is also this new version of him, which is the Blades of the Hollow King, which comes with a new miniature for Cado, alongside one for Aurelius and one for Sendra. You have the ability Retribution or Salvation, which is tied to his sort of power over the forces of death and undeath. So this can be cast. This unit can cast a spell whilst Cado Ezechiar is on the battlefield. Pick a visible unit within 12 inches of this unit to be the target. Then make a casting roll of 2d6. If the target is an enemy unit, inflict d3 mortal damage on it. If the target is a friendly Death Rattle or Deadwalkers unit, subtract 1 from the wound rolls for combat attacks that target that unit for the rest of the turn, which is pretty awesome. You then have Aurelius himself, the Vizier to Neferata, an unwilling ally, I suppose, of Cado. He has ability. This unit can use this ability whilst Aurelius is on the battlefield. Pick one of the following to apply for the rest of the turn. Add 1 to the unit's power level. Each time a casting roll is made for this unit, you may re-roll 1 of the dice, which is pretty good for casting all of your additional spells, which is very cool. This is all built into a nice 6-wound model, effectively. And then you have Solia the Tutor, which is tied into his rings, so you can see her there over the shoulder of Cado. So this unit can use this ability while Cado is on the battlefield. Pick one of the following to apply, and it can either have a ward of 5+, or Ezechian Greatsword, so Cado's blade, can have crit mortals. And as you can see, it already has crit auto wounds as part of its attack profile, which has 5 attacks, hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s, wound, rend 2, and damage 2. Sisendra is also pretty dangerous. She has crit mortals regardless. She has 8 attacks and has 3s to hit, 3s to wound, 1 rend, and 1 damage. And then you have Kenestrix's Fangs, which is the snake that hangs around with Aurelius, which is a companion and has 4s to hit, wounds on 2s, rend 3, but damage d3. So pretty impressive all the same. But that's going to be your linchpin if you were going to be doing your Hollow King style army on the tabletop. So very cool indeed. Now, this leads me to look through a few more of the other battle things. So you do have Radukar and Radukar the Beast in there, alongside the rest of the rest of her family, essentially, which is quite cool. You have your Vampire Lords. You have the new Revenant Draconith. Now, in the background to Cado himself, he has a dragon that he can call upon to do battle with him, which pops up in the first book, spoilers, but you can now actually kind of represent that really nicely on the tabletop with the Revenant Draconith, if you so desire, which is very cool. Lots of other bits and pieces in here, which are all nice indeed. This is the section that I am particularly interested in, though, as well. I love the idea of running a big White King-style army. You have the White King there on foot and mounted, so you have a couple of options on that front, as well as the White Lord and the Death Rattle Skeletons, your sort of standard troops that you'll be using, alongside the likes of the Barrow Knights and the Barrow Guard. And then, of course, never go far without a Necromancer, always pretty handy, although you don't have to, of course. And you have a lot of the other things that you'd expect, so Corpse Carts, the Deadwalker Zombies, Bats and Wolves, as well as your big signature spells that you could unleash on the battlefield, and the Cursed Sepulchre, as you can see there. Now, this ties quite nicely into the rest of this. So you do obviously have the rules in there for your Death Rattle Tomb Host, which could be a great way for you to build up, obviously, Path to Glory rules, which is cool. You could use this to build up the Barrow Legions. Now, this is the army that I think I'd probably end up building, although part of me still wants to run Cado, of course. But the Barrow Legion is really interesting because it allows you to build a force out of, and it doesn't use the other core rules from earlier in the book, by the way. So in most of the time you'll be using this, which uses the same faction rules, battle formations, heroic traits, etc., and all these things here. But instead, you have this. So the Barrow Legion's force is made up of any Death Rattle units, and you cannot include regiments for now. Now you get these new battle traits, as you can see here, so they're all built into this. So you get the Royal Crypt, which essentially allows you to put 3 of the Cursed Sepulchre together on the battlefield, and this essentially is your Barrow Legion entrance, the entrance to your underground kingdom, if you want it to be, that you have to watch over, and allows you to kind of surge forth your forces. And this is where you get the other things here. So it's all sort of tied into the idea of the Royal Crypt. So Grave Sentinels, or Gravy Sentinels as it was when I first read it, is the melee weapons used by friendly Barrow Legion units have anti-charge +1 rend while they are wholly within 9 inches of a friendly sepulchre, so very defensive. You have Altered Dust in the 3rd and subsequent battle rounds while a friendly Cursed Sepulchre is on the battlefield. Subtract 1 from save rolls for enemy units. So if they don't destroy your crypt, as it were, then there is a good chance that you're going to own them slightly later on in the battle. You also have gifts. We'll come to that last, actually. We also have the Endless Legions of Bone, which can be done once per battle round, any movement phase. Pick a friendly non-unique Barrow Legions unit that has been destroyed to be the target. You essentially then get to set up a new unit near your Cursed Sepulchre, your Royal Crypt, that comes in at half the power, essentially. But it allows you to keep sort of essentially recycling units as you go through, which is quite cool. And then last but not least, you have the Gifts of the Petty Kingdoms. And this is where you pick 2 non-unique Barrow Legion heroes that do not have artifacts that you gave them during army creation, and instead give it to them during the deployment phase. So you could build your army around this and choose your various artifacts of power earlier on for your different, well, the one of them anyway, for your leader or your commander or your killer or whatever you want to go. And then after that, depending on the army that you're coming up against, you could come back in and find one of these artifacts of power and give it to them to give you a little bit of a boost, which I think is quite cool. You also obviously have the heroic traits in there as well, which I think is quite nice. So, some really interesting things in there, not necessarily tied into the idea of using a lot of the other spell stuff and the other faction abilities that come with using the vampires and things like that. But if you wanted to make a force that was entirely based around the idea of just a legion of skeletons, this is a really, really cool idea and something that I think you should probably have a look at. I think it could be very, very fun and an interesting hobby project at the same time, especially with the introduction of things like the Cursed Sepulchre as part of your collection. But yeah, that is essentially 5 things that I thought were super cool about the Soulblight Gravelords and the new edition of the game. So as I said, we've got the Barrow Kingdoms, which are pretty awesome. Cado Ezechiar himself is nothing to be sniffed at, an excellent character in his own regard. You then have, of course, the Virkos Brood and all the stuff around Curse City, so if you want to go down that thematic route, you have the option, which I think is a really, really cool thing to still be in the game, especially with all those different characters in there too. And then, of course, we saw the rules for Cado, who is an exceptionally cool character in his own right as well, as we talked about there. And then last but not least, we had the Barrow Legion itself and how it was built up on the tabletop. So, some very cool things coming in there for people who are playing the Soulblight Gravelords. I am sorry that this video is so late after the release of this Battletome, but you know, I was away for a little while and now I'm back. And I'm going to be going through all of these and telling you my 5 favourite things about these different factions. I have, of course, got the Gloomspite Gits and the Eiseneth Deepkin to do, but then there are also the Caradron Overlords and the Blades of Khorne on the horizon as well. And I'll be looking at those in more detail at the same time. Now, yes, I haven't done as much of a detailed just flick through of the book, but there is a lot of stuff in here that I think are pretty awesome. I am potentially tempted to maybe try and do some live streams at some point where I just kind of sit down and go through these books, which I think would be quite cool, just flicking through them generally. But I thought this was a quite nice way for me to not just do the boring thing of here is page 2, here is page 3, blah, 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 blah. Give you my thoughts on particularly cool aspects of the army and, yeah, essentially give you a flavour of what it's like and why I think they're worth picking up and diving into. I will say, as always, there's lots of really, really nice fluff in here for all the different characters that goes back through the various different editions that we've already had. and sort of updates it to find out where they are now. So there's some really good stuff in there if you're a fan of the lore of Warhammer Age of Sigmar and the Mortal Realms. Definitely give that a read. But yeah, do your thing. Tell me in the comments what you thought of this. Like, share, subscribe, hit all the buttons, do all that kind of stuff. But most importantly, as always, get into a conversation with me down in the comments, because I love hearing what you have to say. And I would be excited to hear what kind of Soulblight Gravelord armies you'll be building in the coming months and years. Thanks again for watching and sticking around and carrying along with my crazy little channel and what I've been doing. Every comment, every subscription, etc. is very, very much welcome. Yeah, I'll be back in another video very, very soon. So, bye for now.